positive about it.
Yes, people, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to another live stream and general Chelsea news update. International break pretty much done and dusted. The Premier League's back this weekend, but as always with Chelsea, there is plenty of news to get stuck into. January window is not a million miles away and there's a few sort of rumours starting to surface. So to go through all the latest news, get the latest on the likes of Nkunku, the search for a new centre-back. Delighted to be joined by Ben Jacobs again. Mate, thanks for coming. It's a pleasure, as always, to catch up. First things first, Christopher Nkunku. From a Chelsea fan's perspective, or certainly from my perspective, it feels like it's a situation that's kind of been bubbling away a little bit. I don't think it's quite gone how he would have expected since he joined the club. I think the expectation, certainly from the fans and probably himself, that he was going to be one of the main guys. Obviously, the injury last season didn't help things, but he's come into this season and he's not first choice. He's featuring very, very sparsely in the Premier League. He's been an unused sub on a few occasions, and some reports have surfaced recently suggesting, he's considering his future. He might not be happy at the club, and you can understand why. He's a player of his quality. He should be playing a lot more. He's back in the France setup. At the end of next season, there's the World Cup, so he's got kind of that to think about as well in regards to his playing time. But what is kind of the latest with Nkunku? Is he unhappy at Chelsea? I mean, where have these reports come from and how much truth is there in it?
I don't think unhappy. Every Chelsea player wants to play, but we're very early in the season and I still expect Christopher Nkunku to get Premier League starts, and we're heading into the festive period, so it might be the first time that Enzo Maresca does chop and change a little bit. He's kind of unfortunate. If you think about his favoured position, it's where Cole Palmer's playing, and then you've got Nicholas Jackson, who's a different kind of number 9, and at the moment that's what Enzo Maresca wants. It's not necessarily a negative the way that the new Chelsea manager is handling it, because what he's saying to his players is if it's clicking, he won't over tinker. So it's really easy to say, well, why didn't he play Nkunku or anybody really in that particular Premier League game? But what we're seeing is a reward and a consistent selection when things are going well, and everyone's still learning this system. And I think that Nicholas Jackson has that faith, and therefore Nkunku is competing with Jackson, but not quite the same kind of player, and competing with Cole Palmer. And he's never going to win that battle as long as Cole Palmer continues to be Cole Palmer. It was interesting that Enzo Maresca said when he kind of gave these either ors, even though it's not 100% rigid, it was very much Cole Palmer or João Felix, Nicholas Jackson or Christopher Nkunku, which suggests in the manager's mind, if we're to take Maresca at his word, that it is that battle with Jackson. So it's stylistic in many ways that Nkunku isn't quite the same kind of number 9, and therefore his game time has been limited, but he is still the top goal scorer at the club. I'm not aware the player's unhappy. I'm not aware the player's gone to Enzo Maresca or anyone at Chelsea and said he wants to leave. I'm certainly not aware, despite some reports, of any approach from Manchester United. So at the moment, there's a lot of kind of posturing going on via the media, but it's all very quiet as far as Nkunku's concerned. He has spoken to Enzo Maresca. He has been told how integral he is. He has been informed that he will get opportunities in the Premier League, and they're very happy with his development at Cobham as well. So I think before leaping to a dramatic or sensationalist conclusion that Nkunku could somehow leave imminently, it would be more wise for people to wait until the full festive period is finished, because at that point, I think you'll see that Christopher Nkunku is starting to start Premier League games. And I don't think it would surprise anyone, would it? Whatever means he scores his goals if the season ends and he's the top scorer at the football club. And how many clubs, if they have someone who's their top scorer, whether that's Club World Cup, Europa League, FA Cup or Premier League, how many clubs would want to put their top goal scorer on the market, or would accept, if the player wanted a change, that they could leave when there's so long left on their contract? So I don't see any scenario at this stage where in 2025 Christopher Nkunku leaves Chelsea.
No, I agree with you. When I saw them, I saw those reports coming out. I could have understood it a little bit, but I also thought, as you mentioned, it's little bit early to be going with that in terms of, we've got the fixtures coming up in the build up to Christmas. There's a lot of games every 2-3 days. You would expect him to get starts, and then you could understand it more if he wasn't getting many extra minutes in these upcoming fixtures to Christmas. Then you could sort of understand maybe a few reports coming in January potentially that, or maybe he's not happy, he needs to think about his game time. But whilst, those fixtures haven't even appeared yet, I think it's a little bit premature to go with it. But I mean, this is probably throwing it forward a little bit. But if Chelsea are to go for a striker next summer, I don't know if they're going to go back in the market or not. They might well do, they may not. But you would have to think potentially that it would seem difficult for Nkunku to remain at the club if Chelsea go in for another striker, because they're not going to get rid of Joao Felix, who's only just signed in the summer gone. And Nkunku's not going to be shifted out to play wide. You've got Esteval Willian coming. You've got obviously Kendry Paez coming. So if Chelsea move for a striker next summer, maybe, could you see a situation where almost maybe, even if he doesn't want to, Nkunku kind of by default almost has to leave?
No, because you're starting with the assumption that he falls down the pecking order just purely hypothetically on a striker that may or may not arrive, and two young players that you mentioned that are slightly different to Christopher Nkunku, and we don't know what the game plan or the pathways are. What I can tell you, as I exclusively reported and the players now said, is that in December or January, Esteval Willian will visit Cobham and then find out his pathway. That's likely to be more instant Chelsea first team. Kendry Paez, there's more of a question mark over in terms of his development and whether or not he will or won't be sent out on loan when he joins Chelsea. And then you've got this hypothetical striker that may or may not be an arrival and may or may not be established and may or may not be big money. And a lot of the may or may nots could well depend on Nicholas Jackson and how well he does, and even Nkunku in terms of his goal-scoring prowess. Because everyone's saying Chelsea need a striker, and everyone's sort of looking as if it's a Christmas wish list and thinking, well, Victor Osimhen definitely could be somebody that improves this side. Victor Gyökeres is available on the market. Even a player, I know it won't be as popular with the fan base, like Jonathan David's available on a free transfer. And Chelsea are so ingrained with signing all the time that it's difficult to kind of put the brakes on and say, have we actually got enough in this Chelsea squad that we don't need to keep signing anymore? So right now, there is not the Graham Potter need or even the Maurizio Pochettino need for a striker to come in, because Chelsea are second top scorers in the Premier League. They're probably one, if not the top scorer across most of Europe, if you factor in the goals they've scored in the League Cup and the goals that they've scored in the UEFA Europa Conference League. So if they got to the end of, let's just call it this season or after the Club World Cup, and at that point they had scored this volume of goals, then maybe they turn around and say, we're happy with Jackson and Nkunku and Palmer and Esteval Willian and others. And my doorbell's rang as well, so I'll be back.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, no, it's a fair point, guys. I mean, the Nkunku situation is an interesting one. It's certainly one of them where you're sort of looking at it and you think, well, you're one Jackson injury away from suddenly being very, very reliant on Nkunku to play, to get the goals. But whilst Jackson's fit, it's a little bit more difficult for him, and you can't really make a case for him, starting ahead of him. But he's still a very important part of the squad. And certainly in this upcoming period, I would expect him to start a number of games. I would expect him to be heavily involved. But it's just about finding that balance at the moment. You probably have to play a little bit differently with Nkunku in the team than you would with a Nicholas Jackson in the team. Nkunku obviously doesn't do those runs in behind. He doesn't, stretch play like Nicholas Jackson does. He's good with the ball in tight spaces. You have to play in a slightly different way. But if Jackson were to get an injury, you are suddenly very reliant on Nkunku. So, yeah, I think he still play a lot of minutes this season. But it's just a strange one. You have all these options, and then it's all of a sudden it becomes quite difficult to sort of fit them in. But I suppose it's not a bad problem to have by any account. So, I mean, obviously, yeah. So Nkunku, as far as you're concerned, mate, just to round this little section out, right now there's nothing to suggest that he's seriously giving any consideration to any imminent departure.
No, I don't think so. Ultimately, it's tough for all players because many of them got one pitch before they joined, one pitch under Maurizio Pochettino, and a new pitch and style under Enzo Maresca. And if you add the fact that Nkunku was injured and was he fit, probably would have played the lion's share under Pochettino of last season. He's had a very atypical and unstable progression at Chelsea. So now he's fit and impressed during pre-season. He's waiting for that Premier League opportunity, but we're so early in the season that we can't say he's not going to get it. And we can't say that the player is thinking this was a mistake joining Chelsea. He was solely focused on getting fully fit. He is now fully fit. And every time he's had an opportunity, he's put the ball in the back of the net. Now, we can't judge the stats like for like because some of Nkunku's goals have come against weaker opposition. And therefore, a lot of people will call for him to play because he's shown he can put the ball in the back of the net. But you definitely can't say Jackson's done X and Nkunku's done Y and they're like for like because the opposition isn't consistently the same. And I think at the moment, what they like about Nicholas Jackson is the overall stylistic fit and the fact they think Jackson Palmer may work better than Palmer Nkunku or Nkunku Jackson. And then the second aspect is just the fact that if Nkunku was to be forced into this system, then Palmer may go out of position, or not out of position, but into his secondary position in a wide right. Or alternatively, Nkunku may have to play wide. And we know that Nkunku isn't your traditional kind of winger. And really what Enzo Maresca wants is a wide winger that will stay wide, that will keep the shape, that can do your one-on-ones, that has a killer delivery. And yet there is still that expectation that the output in terms of goal contributions has to be the same as a wide forward. Whereas Christopher Nkunku, much like Cole Palmer, wants to get central, doesn't want to get white chalk on the boots all the time and isn't as comfortable in that position. So it's sort of a mixture of things why he's not playing. One, because he was recovering from injury. Two, because Nicholas Jackson is seen at the moment as a better fit and an informed number 9. And 3, just unfortunately for Nkunku, he's fighting in that 8, if you like, or most advanced midfield spot, whatever you want to call it, against Palmer, against João Felix, against technically Kiernan Dewsbury Hall, even though we've not seen much of him. In theory, Carney Chukwuemekwa as well. So his opportunities have been limited. But whether or not that maintains itself for the entire season, I think we're going to have to wait and see. And like I said to you earlier, when I speak to sources either close to Nkunku or around Cobham, they all kind of say the same thing, that this clear divide so far between Premier League Chelsea team and, if you like, other Chelsea team will not be as rigid or as consistent once we get into and past the festive period. So go back to another key point, which is you've got a brand new manager and a brand new system. So, of course, that manager is going to want to work out a relatively consistent 11 and shape that system and stick with them because the team are third in the table. But as everybody learns the system and the workload increases and the manager feels confident that his entire squad can be dropped in and play in that system because they've had more time to actually gel, at that point, I think you will see a lot more rotation and a much more fluid line between the so-called Premier League 11 or 12 or 13 or whatever it is in terms of the main one he's used and the Europa League squad. And then you're going to have the inverse as well. Remember, Europa Conference League, of course, is what I should have said. And then the other thing is that, and you get the second half of the season and things are at stake, and it will inverse the other way because you'll have a Chelsea team that inevitably not only qualify in the Conference League, but get into the final stages. At that point, you would presume that your Palmers, your Reece Jameses and so on get put into that squad because that becomes a priority because Chelsea want to try and win that trophy. And then again, you might find that some of the Europa Conference League players go into the Premier League squad as well. So it's not just one way, like a bunch of players fighting to get into the Premier League team. It's also some from that so-called Premier League team moving into other competitions as Chelsea get to the business end and into the Club World Cup squad at the end of the season. And that workload for them will give up the opportunities to players like Nkunku in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think people forget there's still so many games. Like the season's going a long, long way this summer, even obviously newly reformatted Club World Cup as well. So there's a lot of matches to play. There'll be injuries, suspensions, rotations. So there's plenty of opportunities for these guys to play. Mate, you just very quickly, you mentioned Jonathan David. Now, I mean, I'm not suggesting that Chelsea's going to go in for him or anything like that. There was reports with him over the summer as a potential target. He's going to be on a free. I don't believe it certainly doesn't seem like he's going to sign a new contract at Lille unless anything drastically changes. From anything you might have heard or whatever, is there any interest from Chelsea side on Jonathan David, or has that kind of been and gone in the summer and they're looking elsewhere now?
Well, they made an inquiry for him last summer, but we know that by deadline day, they turned their attention to trying to get Victor Osimhen over the line. The only thing about David is that much like Tosin, if you look to strengthen and add depth, then he becomes a bit of a free hit because at the moment he'll be a free transfer. And I think a lot of clubs will be looking at Jonathan David. So Chelsea haven't ruled out David, but at the moment they've not ruled in anybody because they're scoring a lot of goals. I still think if the right opportunity comes for Victor Osimhen, they'll return. And it'll be interesting with Osimhen as to whether a loan spell that he didn't anticipate in Turkey makes him reconsider potentially going on loan to Chelsea, which is what they wanted with either an option or an obligation on their terms and on their wage. And Osimhen is enjoying his life in Turkey and may not leave mid-season. And then by the time we get to the summer, is the price of Osimhen, the structure of Osimhen, and the wage that he's prepared to accept going to be something that, again, turns Chelsea's head? So there's plenty of opportunism in the market. And what I would say is that if Chelsea add, it will be a later decision at this point with the striker, because for now, they're scoring a ton of goals. And if Jackson improves on his first season numbers, he's likely to get 20 goals. And if Nkunku scores 20 goals, and if Palmer scores 20 odd goals, or let's just call it 25 goal contributions or more, you get to the point where you think, and even the fan base may think, Jackson's going to be playing a lot of games again because he scored 17 goals, then 20 goals, and Palmer will be undroppable. And if Nkunku chips in with 20, you're delighted with that firepower, whether it comes in other competitions, whether it comes off the bench, or whether it comes from Premier League starts. So we have to understand that these recruitment teams, even though fans want black and white answers, are not making the call today, tomorrow, next week, and likely, unless there's opportunism, not in January either, because they want to work out whether what they've bought is good enough. And if you're buying wisely, and we know that body-wise Chelsea have got enough numbers, then you don't want to be in a position where you buy again and buy again and buy again because the grass is always greener on the other side. At some point, the biggest success Chelsea can have in a transfer window is buying nobody, because they're like, wow, we've got 25 core players all under the age of 25. We've got another 10 coming through the academy. We've got another 3 or 4 out on loan. We've got another 3 or 4 from Brazil and other parts of South America that are arriving in the next year, year and a half, 2 years, depending on how many others from that part of the world they've got in the pipeline. And if the majority of them break through and succeed, you just sit back and say, our project for now is done. We stick with what we've got. We only really need to tweak in small areas because the side is succeeding. So I think everyone wrongly has ingrained in their head that Chelsea need goals, Chelsea need a striker, and everyone still wants that massive name. And it might come, but remember, the model is not about the massive name. The model is youth-led. The model is players for the now and for the future. The model is players on incentive-driven contracts. The model is buy stars just before or just as they become stars and then watch them thrive at Chelsea. And people have had ingrained in their head for the last 2 years, it doesn't work. We're mid-table. We're not like we were under Abramovich. We're not winning anything. And these players are not quite the same as the Drogbas or the Lampards or the Terrys that we're used to. So we need a name to pacify us. We need a star. And if you actually get another year in to summer 2025 and Chelsea's model is right, and these players that people were doubtful about become those stars, then they'll pivot and say, we don't need to buy. So people want the simple answer because it makes a nice headline, which is Chelsea are going to come back in for Osimhen, or Chelsea have changed their mind on Gyökeres, or Chelsea are going to be opportunistic and sign Jonathan David on a free transfer. But they'll only take that move if they feel that there's a need in the squad, and they won't make that judgment call until later in the season.
Okay, no, it makes sense. And I mean, like, the club's coming for a lot of criticism. I've even been critical at times myself. A lot of fans have of the recruitment policy, but you know, it's starting to look a little bit like now maybe the plan wasn't that bad in the first place. You look at some of the names that were scouted. You look at John Duran doing very well. A lot of Chelsea fans weren't happy when his name was linked over the summer. The same with Samuel Morodion. I'll tell you what, would have preferred to have him right now than signing Joao Felix. Would have made a lot more sense to bring in an Morodion than a Felix. So, you know, I think there does have to be a degree of caution when sort of you hear players that are linked and you think, oh God, what are we doing sort of looking at someone like that? Because actually the scouting has been pretty good. Even though they've not signed all these players, the scouting has been decent and the recruitment's been good as well. But I mean, moving on to centre-backs, Ben, obviously it was been reported that Chelsea are actively, you know, scouting the centre-back market. I think it's quite obvious that a new centre-back is being looked for. There's been links with the likes of Tomas Araujo at Benfica, is obviously his teammate Antonio Silva as well. There have been conversations in the past about Murillo at Nottingham Forest. Obviously, I think he'd be a lot more expensive. Firstly, what sort of centre-back are Chelsea looking for? Are they looking for a starting quality centre-back in terms of one to maybe replace a Fofana or a Colwell? Or are they looking for a sort of a squad rotation option, but is closer in quality to Fofana and Colwell than a Tosin or a Badiashile, for example? What sort of centre-back are they looking for?
Yeah, I think a squad option and perhaps, again, a relatively young centre-back that is a few years younger than they've got. And it might not seem like a particular difference between, say, Levi Colwell, who in a year's time will be 22, and signing a player that might be 19 or 20. But it just means that if that player feels they've got a pathway, because at some point Colwell's going to be 24, 25, 26, and then that player is going to be 23, 24. I know it might feel like they're the same generation, but that's better than signing someone the same age as Colwell, or even somebody 22 to 24, because that kind of player will likely want more immediate game time. So I still think that in the same way that Aaron Anselmino is another Chelsea signing incoming, they'll be looking for high teens or early 20s and squad player. Because on the left side, in this back four, in this formation anyway, nobody is supplanting Levi Colwell on his current form. He's pretty much the second name on the team sheet after only Cole Palmer. And then the right side, there is a little bit more of a question mark, but there's two very good and competitive options in the form of Wesley Fofana and Tosin. And Tosin is appreciated for his leadership skills and a lot of what he does off the field, was an opportunistic signing because he was a free transfer. So Chelsea are delighted with the depth they've got at the moment, and where they buy next will also depend on any potential outgoing. So contrary to some reports, I'm told, as I've reported, that Benoit Badiashile is not on the way out. His progression is going well, and he's part of the thinking. Axel Disasi, I'm getting mixed messaging, and therefore, if you look at it in that context, was Disasi to go, you might bring in a squad right-sided centre-back, also capable of playing at right-back. And that's partly because we don't know whether Reece James can sustain his fitness. Let's hope so. But if we're only looking at the history, we have to raise that point. And it's also because Malo Gusto could end up playing on the left side. And so, by the way, could Reece James as well. So working under the assumption that Trevor Chalobah will be sold in 2025 permanently, and he's currently on loan at Crystal Palace, a right-sided centre-back who maybe is capable of playing at right-back cover is kind of the profile where there might be a window of opportunity. I don't think Chelsea feel like they don't have elite centre-backs. And I'm like surprised, maybe you've got a view on this, Charlie, from the fan point of view, but I'm not a Chelsea fan. And as a journalist, if I take a step back, I'm surprised at how many people are not convinced by Wesley Fofana and the Colwell-Fofana partnership. Because as a Leicester fan, I've seen enough of Wesley Fofana that as he, a bit like James, proves he can go a full season fit, and as he gets better and better and better throughout the season, I'm not so sure that you need a so-called starting centre-back beyond that Colwell-Wesley Fofana partnership, because I'm not sure on form, if they both live up to their billing, you can maybe get a better pairing than that. But seemingly, and I don't know if you agree, Charlie, but a lot of Chelsea fans come to me and they say they've got doubts about Wesley Fofana.
That's the one thing that I can't get my head around. I speak about it a lot. Like, I just don't understand why so many Chelsea fans seemingly don't have belief in Wesley Fofana or don't seem to rate him. I remember right at the start of the season when Tosin played against West Ham, and Fofana played at right back or whatever, because there was Gusto and James both missing. Like, Tosin had a good game at the back alongside Colwell. A lot of people were saying afterwards, oh, yeah, that's it. Tosin should be starting ahead of Fofana. He's better than Fofana. I think so many people forget that Fofana hasn't played any football for a year, and he's like 11 matches back from a serious injury. He suffered a number of serious injuries early in his career. The guy's a really, really good centre-back. He's got so much potential. You only have to look at what he was doing at Leicester. I think even at St Etienne, when him and Saliba were coming through together, sort of the conversation was always, oh, Fofana was the one that had the greater potential and whatnot. Obviously, it's not quite panned out like that so far. But yeah, I don't understand it. It's a real strange one. But if Fofana lives up to his potential, then he's comfortably, in my opinion, if he's fit and playing at his best, he's Chelsea's best centre-back. He's the best centre-back we've got at the football club. And we're still waiting to see that form. And hopefully it comes as he gets fitter and more confident. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't understand why so many Chelsea fans aren't sort of appreciative of Fofana and think we can do better, think there needs to be a replacement. I just don't subscribe to that sort of thought process at all. But in terms of the names, mate, Jonathan Tah was one. There was a flurry of reports the other day saying that Chelsea were in talks. I've seen others now subsequently saying that those reports are believed not to be true. Can we say that Jonathan Tah is someone that Chelsea aren't looking at? Have they looked at him in the past? What's kind of the state of play with him amongst those reports that have come out recently?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any Chelsea interest in Jonathan Tah historically or now. I think sometimes these reports come from the fact that lots of clubs send lots of scouts out there, but scouting really doesn't mean anything. It always makes me chuckle a little bit when you hear reports that hinge their headline on the scouting part. It's normal in reporting to say that teams have tracked or sent scouts too, but you need a bit more than that to actually make the interest concrete, because Chelsea have probably watched up to 100 different players for various reasons in terms of their scouting. And that's just because you don't just pick and then watch. You watch, assess, make comparisons, compile data, have a discussion, whittle it down, watch players again, and then only then do you maybe start to think, okay, now we're going to work out whether we're going to move on this profile. So Chelsea and Jonathan Tah, I'm not aware of. Araujo has more substance to it, as far as I'm told. So that could be one to watch. Murillo, they did make an inquiry to understand whether there was a possibility of a departure, but we're talking historical again. And we have to understand once more, coming back to the first point I said, what are Chelsea looking for here? Because Araujo might be someone that fits into the kind of Chelsea plan and pathways, but Murillo would expect to move if he's going to leave and play instantly. And Chelsea may not be able to offer him that. And that's maybe the difference at this point. So if you think about Potter and Pochettino, the irony is, because Chelsea were not succeeding on the field and they were chopping and changing and using lots of different players due to either form or injuries, and because the ownership was spending a lot, players coming in felt like they were the solution, felt like they were the difference maker. And you could pitch accordingly. We need you because we're thin in that position. We need you because we're not doing well. We need you because we've got injuries. So players think, great. Now, even though it's a good thing for Chelsea and for Maresca, it's a much more consistent 11 and things are going well. So players are going to look at that and think to themselves, regardless of what the pitch is, this manager doesn't rotate as much. Chelsea are looking good. Chelsea are succeeding. So when you're signing a player now, it presents a different challenge, quite a good challenge to have, of course, but a very different one where you can't just go to every player under the sun and say, we want you, we need you, and make that player feel like they're going to be dropped in, because there's more evidence that they're not. Christopher Nkunku is almost like a new signing due to injuries. He's not starting in the Premier League. Joao Felix is a new signing. He's not really starting in the Premier League. Jadon Sancho came in, but hasn't started as many games. Pedro Neto likes playing on the right-hand side, but Noni Madueke has played the predominant amount of Premier League games there. So we see a pattern. Tosin comes in, free transfer, very much an integral part of the first team, but still Wesley Fofana has predominantly held his place. Philip Jorgensen comes in, Robert Sanchez has held his place in the Premier League. Therefore, when you're thinking about a Murillo versus a Araujo, one is going to look at the Chelsea pitch and ask a simple question: am I going to be a starting defender or not? And Enzo Maresca may not be able to give those guarantees if the Chelsea project is going according to plan, which is why, again, if they are going to strengthen, they might buy someone a little bit more younger, and both for the now and for the future, that will be more comfortable as a footballer and a character, not playing every week in the Premier League, because that feels like a better fit, given the fact that if Chelsea are winning, Maresca isn't going to over-rotate in the Premier League.
Yeah, and it's difficult as well. It's not like the attacking positions where, you're switching those positions in game. You're subbing them off. Centre-backs, you're not changing a centre-back pairing in game unless there's an injury or someone's having an absolute nightmare. So there's not as much scope for rotation in there as well. So it's a little bit more set than it might be further up the pitch. So it is hard to find a player that is of a good enough quality, but then is also happy or prepared to sit on the bench for potentially a large part of the season as well. And that's where it gets difficult to convince players to come of the required quality, because you can't offer the guarantees that they might be able to get at other clubs. So it is a hard one. But mate, there's a lot of questions in the chat about the goalkeeping situation. Obviously a lot of Chelsea fans not happy with Robert Sanchez. Don't believe he's of the required quality. A lot of people, certainly pundits in the media and stuff, is thinking that Chelsea need to upgrade in that position. We've had the reports coming out about, Chelsea believing in Sanchez. Maresca's backed him on a number of times. They think he can become one of the best goalkeepers in the Premier League. I'm personally not sure I believe that. We've spent a lot of money on a lot of goalkeepers over the last few windows. Don't seem to have one that's actually good enough to be a first choice for the club in the long run. What's happening with Chelsea and goalkeepers right now, Ben? Yes, the reports are saying they believe in Sanchez. Do you, from what you understand, do you believe that to be the case, or is that just sort of going out there as a sort of a bit of a protection buffer for Sanchez at a difficult period for him?
No, I believe that to be the case. And ultimately, you've got a £35 million goalkeeper in Philip Jorgensen that's at the club and available. So if they really didn't believe in Rob Sanchez, then you'd see Jorgensen being given a Premier League chance. There's an element of him having to adapt to this system. And of course, there's been errors and glaring ones at times. But in a weird way, you'd rather have the glaring error that should be fixable and shouldn't happen than a error due to the fact that a player simply isn't at the required level. In other words, if under pressure he's making an error, he has to learn how to distribute better under pressure. And that may be more fixable than if he just didn't have deft feet or if he just wasn't calm in the box. So I think Chelsea still feel that every 10 games or so, you're going to see a bit of improvement out of Robert Sanchez, and he's really up for the fight of keeping this number one spot. He's got a good attitude. He's got a great relationship with Jorgensen. They like each other. They train well. And therefore, you might still see Sanchez getting better and better and better. But of course, there are those errors. And in the meantime, as he develops, Jorgensen will get up to Premier League speed as well. So I would be surprised if Chelsea look at a goalkeeper in January, despite reports. I would be surprised even if they bring in a number one goalkeeper in summer 2025, because what message does that also send to both Sanchez and Jorgensen, but also Jordi Petrovic and Mike Penders? And make no mistake, Chelsea with Penders feel like he is a phenomenal talent and somebody that could develop very quickly and could get between the sticks very fast. So I think the biggest loser here could be Gaga Slonina, because it feels like he's falling down the pecking order. I think Jordi Petrovic could go as well in summer 2025. And of course, if you add that to Jorgensen's development and Pender's development, then you might say if Sanchez becomes a number two at the football club, he may be the one that chooses to leave. But at this stage, Chelsea feel like he can get better and be number one. So they're not necessarily looking at replacing from the outside with another goalkeeper, because you bring in another goalkeeper and to get better than Sanchez and Jorgensen, you're probably having to buy someone in their mid-20s or older who's fully established and might have a 4 or 5 year longevity as a number one at a football club. And if you do that, then you're pushing back in terms of their development so many young goalkeepers that Chelsea have got. And it would then, I think, make the Jorgensen signing look like a lot of money just to have him at the football club as a number two. So logically, I think they'll develop Sanchez with a belief that he can stay number one, but also know that Jorgensen is there and at £35 million can become the number one at the football club. And they're happy at the moment with the competition between those two players. In defence of Sanchez as well, I'd love to see a sort of side by side of how many big errors he's made, how many goals are his fault, how many times he has let in more than the expected goals in a game, all of which I suppose is evidence for he isn't reliable at times, but versus how many points he's actually saved. Because I think Chelsea don't win that game at Bournemouth without Rob Sanchez.
No,
Chelsea lose at home to Nottingham Forest in the final few minutes if Rob Sanchez isn't in goal. So the challenge with Sanchez is we either see the very worst or the very best, and we need to see a more consistent in between. And he is a very divisive and extreme goalkeeper where you either feel like, uh-oh, we've dropped points because of him, or wow, how did he stop that? He saved us points. And really, sometimes with your goalkeeper, as odd as it may sound, you kind of just want such a consistent performance that you're not talking about them that often. Yeah. You're not thinking about them. They're just there doing all the basics right, giving confidence to your back four. And then because Chelsea have a lot of the ball, don't concede that many shots on goal, they do their business at the other end. And Sanchez goes a bit unnoticed. And the sign of improvement for Rob Sanchez will be if he can go through 90 minutes, as weird as it may sound, largely unnoticed.
Yeah, that for me is the big thing. Like what you say, like is true. Like he does do some good things, but the problem is the good things that he does are then forgotten about because of the caliber of the mistakes that are being made. Now, I'm not saying that we would have beaten Arsenal if he saves that Martinelli shot at his near post, but I would feel pretty confident saying a better goalkeeper doesn't allow that shot to go in. I'm not saying we win the game, but you know, the result might not change, but those kind of errors, you know, the penalty against Man United, you know, Højlund's going away from goal. You know, in my opinion, I mean, obviously I've never been in that position before, but you look at it and you think, do I need to be making that decision when the striker's going away from goal? So for me, I just think his decision making at times is not good. The distribution, which is supposedly what he's in the team for, has been very poor. And you look at players that have improved under Maresca, and a lot of players have improved under Maresca, by the way, and they deserve praise for that. But I look at Sanchez, and maybe I'm just looking at the bad side of it, potentially, but I just don't see how this guy's made any improvement since Maresca's come in, like a lot of other players have. And I know he's going to be number one, and we just have to hope that we're not talking about him on a weekly basis. But I also feel maybe that nervousness, knowing that you've got a goalkeeper behind you as a defensive line, that we're not waiting. We're not, we might make a mistake. That happens. Like you're playing with that fear that the guy behind you is going to make a mistake. It's just a case of when. And I can't think that's a great position to be in. It just amazes me that Chelsea, for all the money we've spent, and we haven't had a top class goalkeeper since Thibaut Courtois left. And you just sort of think you've gone through them all. You had a small spell with Edouard Mendy, who was playing very well, but there's just been no top class goalkeepers. And you look at how important that position is. Look, Liverpool with Klopp identified Alisson in big difference. Pep went for a couple of goalkeepers before he found Edison. It makes a big difference. I mean, is there a reason maybe that you can think of, Ben, why Chelsea haven't seemingly looked to prioritise bringing in a top class goalkeeper?
Yeah, I don't think there's that many of them actually available on the market. And I also don't think, for example, when Edison was being linked with a move to Saudi Arabia, I'm not so sure that Manchester City would have done business if a club like Chelsea had come in. I'm not aware that they even tried, but sometimes a really elite goalkeeper is available on the market. And that doesn't mean that if they're in the Premier League, Chelsea would have the same terms or the same ability to sign them as somewhere else. Bento went to Saudi Arabia and Chelsea had looked at him. Mamadashvili is coming to Liverpool to effectively succeed Alisson. And I often get people ask me about him, but remember, he's not the same style as this system. So Jorgensen was prioritised because he was seen as better value, but also a better fit. Chelsea are not there oblivious to a goalkeeper like Mamadashvili. They just know that he's not quite the type of goalkeeper that Enzo Maresca is looking for. You've got Hermansen at Leicester, obviously, and a lot of people ask me about him, and we know that Enzo Maresca really likes him. But I just think you have to think about Chelsea's plan with goalkeepers in the same way as everything else, but then understand that for whatever reason, and I'd love to know the science why, goalkeepers don't tend to mature until they're 25, 26, 27, 28. I've got no idea why, because you would think that football is just football and there should be more 21 to 23-year-old goalkeepers playing at the same level as your Cole Palmers and so on, but there just aren't. So if you look at it in those terms, Sanchez is still young for a goalkeeper. Maybe he can improve. So is Jorgensen. And I think Chelsea just back their recruitment and they feel that from possibly Petrovic, although I genuinely think that he'll go in the summer, maybe Slonina, but I think he's kind of last now in the pecking order, definitely Jorgensen and absolutely Penders plus Sanchez. They obviously just feel that they've got enough there. And therefore, there isn't the need to move for the sake of moving. Now, if they could find someone indisputably that could give the club 3-4 years that was absolutely world class and wanted to move to Chelsea, maybe they changed their mind. But sometimes when people say, why do we not have an Alisson? Why do we not have an Edison? Well, where is that Alisson and Edison that could drop straight in and be much better than what Chelsea have got now? Are they available and do they want to move to Chelsea? I'm not sure that there's as many options as you think. Some had said to me probably more like 2022 than now Emi Martinez, but he's getting on a bit and he's playing Champions League for Villa.
That always gets mentioned as well at Porto. I mean, he's always linked with a move, but never seems to move either. So it is true. There's not that many around that are A, available, and B, would maybe want to move as well. So yeah, it's just a tricky one. I think we're just going to have to hope potentially that maybe Sanchez suddenly develops into something he's not really shown any signs of developing.
Or Jorgensen does again.
Or
you know, you don't spend 35 million usually on a number two. That is probably the overriding thing I would say. But it isn't quite a Ramsdale Raya coming in where there is an immediate and clear passing of the number one. And that's probably because they feel that Jorgensen needs half a season or even longer, and that Sanchez's shot stopping and overall maturity outweighs at the moment the errors. And I would actually say, as frustrating as it may be, and as much as people will point to some of the games maybe Arsenal and the near post goal, possibly Manchester United. I would say Liverpool as well.
Yeah, Curtis Jones one, yeah.
Brighton may have been a game where Sanchez could have cost Chelsea, but thankfully didn't. But even with those errors, if that goalkeeper is making incredible saves at the other extreme and the team are third in the table, you perhaps persist with it because you feel like overall the team is still functioning, and you wait and you wait and you wait. And then when you get to maybe halfway through the season or the end of the season, you say, is Jorgensen ready, or has Sanchez solidified that position as number one? So a lot of Chelsea's recruitment decisions at the moment are not about who do we need, because that's just a knee-jerk reaction to always say we need. Well, things are not working if you need. So the first consideration, I think, within the ownership and the recruitment team and the sporting team at the moment is more just decisions between players they've already got to work out who is good enough and who is top of the pecking order. And once they've determined that, if they're still unsure, only then will they dip in the market. And I don't think we're there yet in this sort of battle for the number one.
No, that's fair enough, mate. Last couple of things I wanted to ask about very briefly. A few people asking in the chat about the ownership situation. Just very briefly, mate, in a few sentences, what's going on at the moment? Because obviously, I think in the previous international break, we had the big news that Eghbali and Bowley, they're not on speaking terms. That one of them wants to buy each other out or whatever. It's now gone very, very quiet. We've not really heard anything about that at all. I think they've been pictured sitting together at events, since that news came out. It might have even been at a Chelsea game. I can't remember now.
West Ham.
Yeah, West Ham. What's kind of going on with that? Because we had the big explosion of that news last international break, or might have been the previous international break. I can't remember which one it was. But there's been absolutely nothing on it. Have you got any insight on anything about what's kind of happening with that right now? Are we any closer to any sort of solution, or, maybe rebuilding that relationship and carrying on? What can you say?
Well, it's amazing, isn't it, how things go quiet when the project is going well.
Yeah.
Part of that is just football. But also, this was never a civil war. This was never an overnight fix. So Badad Eghbali, Jose Feliciano and Todd Bowley and all of their partners are civil and professional and amicable in how they conduct themselves, which you would expect. And therefore, them sitting together or smiling or shaking hands is neither an indication that this has been fixed or an indication at the opposite extreme, if they're not seen together, that there's a massive underlying personal or professional issue that so urgently needs to be fixed that you would expect a kind of day-to-day or week-by-week update. This is ownership. There are financial and legal things that need to be done in private that take some time. So I think when it first broke that neither side wanted to leave, but both sides would consider buying each other out, the expectation from the fan base was that it would be resolved at super speed, much like the Chelsea sale was. But a resolution was always going to take time. So as I reported at the time, the onus is on Todd Bowley, because if the status quo remains, Clearlake are happy. And if Bowley wants something to alter, whether his standing, his role, the strategy, or at the other extreme to buy out Clearlake 100%, it's for him to drive. Because if nothing changes, the majority owner are in the stronger position at any football club. And the Bowley side had indicated that they would like a resolution, whether that is just shaking hands and status quo, or whether that is a change of shares between the parties between now and the end of the year. And we're still not there yet. So I'm not surprised we're not getting a blow-by-blow update, and I'm not surprised that nothing concrete has materialized yet, simply because the Bowley side, who have more urgency and onus, had always indicated through sources to me anyway that this would be a 60-day best-case scenario where something may give. And we're still not at that 60 days yet. At the same time, we have to understand both sides are saying something slightly different. So neither side are confirming they want to leave the football club, and both sides are confirming they would be open to buying out the other side. And when you get that kind of scenario, it's tough to find a resolution before the point at which one side actually makes a concrete offer. And it is more likely, in my opinion, speaking to sources and financial experts, that Bowley will make the first move, because Clearlake don't mind if nothing changes, and Clearlake don't really have a change of strategy or approach. At the same time, it's not like you've really got like a Bowley side and a Clearlake side, and they both want such different things that Clearlake are controlling everything and Bowley's controlling nothing. Everyone's got a veto. Everyone's part of the decision-making process. There are things, big things, that they also agree on. So the club can function also whilst this scenario is resolved. But whether we hear about it or not, it's more likely that the Bowley side try and make a move. And then this is where the key question will be answered. Because the Bowley side argue if they make a move and it offers a healthy return on investment, the Clearlake investors in this Clearlake fund that are not just Bowley and Feliciano, because Bowley and Feliciano only own about 2% of the Clearlake fund with their personal money. The rest are other investors, and all that money is put into a fund, and then Bowley and Egbali manage that fund on behalf of all of the other investors. So the Bowley side argue that those other investors are more dispassionate, they're not day-to-day, they've put their money in a fund, many of whom don't really know that much about football or care that much about football. They've put the money in that fund because they trust Clearlake to get them a return on investment. And therefore, the Bowley side's argument and what they're relying upon is if they get to the point where they can offer a healthy return on investment, the other investors in the Clearlake fund will say, great, let's just take that return on investment. And that will be that. But the Clearlake side crucially argue that that Clearlake fund is discretionary. And what that means is that once the investors have put their money in it, they legally entrust only Egbali, Feliciano and Clearlake to manage the money and make all decisions. So it's basically like a trust fund. And the trustees are the only ones that can take the decisions. So it will never get to the point where it's put to a vote. Even if they offered 20 billion, it will never get to the point where all of the other investors in the fund get to put their hand up and say, do you want to take it or not? It will always only be up to Feliciano and Egbali. And Feliciano and Egbali do not want to sell under any circumstances. Now, if that Clearlake position is correct and accurate legally, then whatever Bowley does, he's going to get a no. At which point you would think, if he makes an offer and fails, that Clearlake may counter and try and buy Bowley and his investors out. But when you spell it out like that, and you have to understand, can they raise the funds? What are the funds in terms of a lucrative and fair amount that may want one or either party to sell? What are the legalities of this discretionary fund? And do they differ if you are dissolving the funds, which is what Bowley wants to do because he wants to buy out 100%? So are there different legal rules if you do something that affects the fund versus if you dissolve the fund? And then when you actually go through the legalities of negotiating that, the whole process could be done in 60 days if everyone's on the same page. But if they're not, it might take something in the region potentially of 9 months or a year, like any other takeover. So this is why it's all gone quiet.
Yeah, mate, it sounds like a very complicated situation. But it is funny how, you know, it goes very quiet as soon as you start doing well on the pitch. You could guarantee if Chelsea were sort of struggling at the start of this season and whatnot, and we weren't in the position we were in heading into this international break, that there would be some form of news about this situation. Mate, last two things, literally so briefly, there's two things in the chat. Update on a front of shirt sponsor, and is Carney Chukwuemeka likely to leave in January? Just very briefly to round out.
Yeah, Chukwuemeka, there could be something in January. I'm not aware yet of any suitors. We know people like Milan have historical interests, but nothing more than that. But he's not playing, so you would expect there to be some kind of resolution. The same, obviously, for Ben Chilwell as well. Chelsea want to get both of these players playing, and it's obvious that they're not going to get that much minutes at Chelsea. Enzo Maresca's made no secret of that. Front of shirt, I think Chelsea will look for short term until such point that they get Champions League, and they have to decide whether it's going to be a paid sponsor in the short term, or whether maybe they're even going to go down the line of looking for a charitable partner, which is something that Nottingham Forest did, because that's good in terms of visibility. It's socially conscious. So maybe if you don't find a paid partner in the short term, you put something more charitable on the shirt, and then you try and sell off the back of what you qualify for next season and also the Club World Cup.
This might be a stupid follow-up, but why can't they just put Infinite Athlete back on the front of the shirt like was in pre-season, like they had last season? Obviously, Bowley and stuff have got good connections with that company. I think, you know, he's involved within it. Is an Infinite Athlete back on the front of the shirt? Is that a possibility? Why hasn't that been done?
I don't think so. I mean, Infinite Athlete was a 40 million deal, and that 40 million deal was short term after the Paramount Plus deal fell through. And Infinite Athlete's partnership with Chelsea is over several years, and it includes some branding and shirt sleeve sponsorship. But the partnership with Infinite Athlete was never meant to be about front of shirt. And why would Infinite Athlete want to necessarily pay another 40 million? Because the kind of brand they are, it's back end. It's about technology. It's about powering Chelsea's app or scoreboard or other things. And these type of things, when you're in technology, don't often require that kind of huge outlay of 40 million pounds to slap your brand on the front, especially because they've already benefited in terms of market awareness. And as a consequence of all of that, is it really in Infinite Athlete's interest? Chelsea may love the idea of Infinite Athlete dropping another 40 odd million, but you got to look at it from Infinite Athlete's point of view. Is it worth that return on investment? So it's not a case of anything went wrong with Infinite Athlete. The front of shirt sponsorship was always just a pivot after Paramount Plus fell through, but the partnership with Infinite Athlete was never about front of shirt. So I'm not really surprised that Infinite Athlete haven't gone back down that route, purely because it's a lot of money for a brand like that with probably very limited return given the sector that they're in. If you're an airline, if you're a bank, if you're somebody that can engage directly with the fan base, you've got a product to sell. You make some of your money back. You would think that more Man City fans fly Etihad Airways because they're the club's official airline and they've been there on the front of shirts. But Infinite Athlete doesn't result necessarily in that return on investment back, given the huge outlay, due to the fact that this is a back-end technology partner. And this is why I think that Infinite Athlete chose not to renew for a year. And from Chelsea's point of view, they're looking for long-term. And as I said before, if they can't find long-term, they've got half a season to decide what they do with that real estate. Technically, they could leave it blank, but I think they'd want to go to the Club World Cup with something. They could do a short-term deal, or they could do more of a charitable deal, which can be good for brand development. So there's a few options there. And I don't think we'll have to wait too much longer to find out the direction of travel, because I'd be surprised if Chelsea don't have a definitive answer as to what they're going to do by January, if not sooner. And that obviously gives the president of commercial, Todd Klein, who's come in, a few months to work out the lay of the land. And then I think a final decision will be taken relatively soon.
Fantastic, mate. Thank you so much for your time. It's greatly appreciated. Always so generous when you're coming on. So yeah, it's greatly appreciated. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you smash the likes on the way out. People, run those likes up. Subscribe to the channel if you're new around here. Let's get this up to 100 likes if we can on the way out. So make sure you're smashing that like button. Subscribe if you're new around here. Ben, as always, thank you so much, mate. Yeah, guys, please make sure you follow Ben on Twitter, X, whatever it's called these days. Loads of great content on there. It'll be linked in the description, people. So make sure you're smashing that like button. Subscribe to the channel. Big thanks to Ben, as always. Sorry, guys, if I didn't answer all your questions in the chat. There was a lot to get through. And yeah, people, will catch up with you soon. Make sure, if you're watching this on the replay, guys, smash the like, share it with your friends and whatnot. And yeah, we'll get Ben back on again soon, guys. Anyway, love for all the support, as always, people. I'll be back again tomorrow with some more content, as always, guys, and as we build up towards the Leicester game. Yeah, make sure you share this far and wide, guys. Loads of great stuff from Ben, as always, people. So yeah, guys, I'm out of here. Enjoy the rest of your Monday afternoon, guys. Let's wait and see what further Chelsea news appears. And yeah, absolutely Wonderful stuff as always, and a great start to the week, guys. Anything you've got in, anything last minute you want to ask me in the chat, guys? Probably not. 6 more likes to 70, guys. Make sure you're smashing that like button on the way out. Let's get this done, people. There's still over 100 in the chat. This should be on 70 likes. And yeah, I better get myself back to work. So big up for all the love as always. Catch you lot tomorrow. Up the Chelsea and peace out, guys.